All right, section 2.5b, using reciprocals and writing and solving one-step multiplication and division equations. That was a pretty long
lengthy
one.
title, yes.
Okay, I'm going to have Mrs. Trombley do her multiplicaplica. Go ahead.
Multiplicative inverse property.
The multiplicative inverse property states that when you multiply reciprocals, the result is always 1. For example. All right, so all we're going to do here is just show you what happens when you take a number and multiply it by its reciprocal. This is so much fun because you just get to cross a bunch of stuff out. So, all right, so the reciprocal of 3/4, you say, is, you're right, it's 4/3. All right, so remember, with multiplying fractions, you get to use this thing called cross-canceling, only with multiplication of fractions. And what you'll notice is I've got the exact same numbers diagonally from one another. So I could just cross a bunch of stuff out, and then you'd be like, then I'm left with nothing. You're not left with nothing, you're actually left with one whole. So, and I'll show you, if I just multiply straight across, I get 12. Multiply straight across the bottom, I get 12. That equals one whole. What I meant by crossing a bunch of stuff out, I'm gonna show it. So if I were to go and do this, I'd say I could just cross them out, but when I do that, what I'm really saying is 3 goes into 3 once, it goes into this 3 once, 4 goes into this 4 once, it goes into this 4 once. So what you're left with is a bunch of ones, so you just end up with 1. Same rule applies with negative fractions. So a negative 5/6, the reciprocal, notice the negative's just out in front, so I'll just throw it out in front over here. Negative 6/5. A negative times a negative is always a positive, so I don't need to worry about that. 5 times 6 is 30. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 divided by 30, that's 1. All right. Ooh.
Dun dun dun.
What's the reciprocal of negative 7? Every number can be written as a fraction. Magically. Watch for it. There.
Bam!
Bam! Suddenly, this whole number is a fraction. So the reciprocal now of negative 7 over 1 would be 1 over negative 7. Multiply straight across the top. I get 7 times negative 1 is negative 7. 1 times negative 7 is another negative 7. I have a number divided by itself, which always equals 1. So that was so fun. You might be wondering, well, that's awesome. I could do a million of those. Yeah, well, you're going to have to apply it to these equations that you're going to solve. So understanding this property will help you solve equations that have fractional coefficients. These are a little bit different than just the plain old division problems that had like n divided by 8. These are looking a little bit different. We're going to solve each equation. You must show your work. Check for the solutions. Okay, so when we are solving equations, remember the ultimate goal is to just get the variable alone. Not to eliminate it, but to get it by itself, which means your goal is to end up with a coefficient of 1 in front of the variable. So I want to turn this 3/8 into a 1. How would I do that? How do I turn any fraction into 1?
You just need the multiplicative inverse.
We're going to use that to turn each of these coefficients into 1. So if I want to turn 3/8 into 1, I'm going to multiply it by its reciprocal of 8/3. And that technically means I'm getting rid of all those or turning them all into 1s, and so I'm left with just plain old h on this side. And that's great, but remember, as always, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I also have to multiply the other side of this equation by 8/3. If you need to throw a 1 underneath that so that you can go straight across the top and straight across the bottom, you go for it. Negative 9 times 8 is negative 72. 1 times 3 is 3. And negative 72/3 happens to be a negative 24. All right, you should be going back to check all of these because that's how we roll. You should. Not should, you will. You will go back and check.
You
all
must.
of these. You must. Not an option. All right, so I'm going to take the original 3/8 and I'm going to multiply it by this here h, which I say is negative 24, and it should equal negative 9. All right, I could throw a 1 under this if I want to. What I end up with over here on this side is 3 times negative 24, which is a negative 72. And on the bottom, I end up with 8 times 1. So a negative 72 divided by 8, 72 divided by 8 is 9. And since it's 1 of each, means it's negative 9. Yep, that is the answer. again, we have the x on the right side. I think it's the wrong side. Don't worry about that. It's okay. It's okay. All right, so we're going to get rid of 2/3. Not necessarily get rid of it. We want to turn it into a 1. It's like a superhero. So we want to turn 2/3 into 1. I can do that by multiplying it by its reciprocal of 3 halves. And then if you wanted, show the cross canceling because that's fun, just to cross a bunch of stuff out. We're left with 1x, or just plain old x. But again, what I did to one side, I have to do to the other. I multiplied by 3 halves. Same thing over here. So I'm going to go ahead and take 3 halves times a negative 14 over 1. 3 times negative 14. Let's see, that's wording. 42. We have negative 42 over 2. See how that works out? This is why you don't use pen for me. But we do. Negative 42 over 2, negative 42 divided by 2 equals 21. So we have a negative 21 equals x. Just to double check, we should get that a negative 14 is equal to 2/3 times negative 21. Ooh, I'm going to use some cross canceling here, Mrs. Trumbull.
That's a great plan.
I'm going to say, oh.
You know we got time for that.
No.
Do it the other way.
3 goes into 3 once. It goes into this 7 times. What's 2 times negative 7? We have 14. That means that is right. Alrighty.
Ooh,
example
negative.
here. Ooh, check it out. Alright, so just to refresh your memory, remember that the reciprocal of a negative fraction is just also a negative. So don't worry about that. So the reciprocal of a negative 4/5 is a negative 5/4, which means the stuff all goes away. I'm left with just x, or 1x. I have to also multiply this side by negative 5/4. Throw a 1 under that if you want to. Alright, so we end up with negative 8 times a negative 5, which is positive 40. And 1 times 4 is 4. 40 divided by 4 is 10. So I think x equals 10. I'm going to plug it in just to be sure. Negative 4/5 times 10 should equal negative 8. Going to use some cross canceling. Yeah, 5 goes into 5 once. 5 goes into 10 twice. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Yeah. Alright. Another one like this. The reciprocal of negative 8/5 is negative 5/8. Do that. I get to cross a bunch of stuff out because that's fun. I'm left with 1c, or just plain old c. And I'm going to take and multiply this side by negative 5/8. Throw 1 under that if you want. I end up with negative 25 on top and 8 on the bottom. Oh,
Ooh.
no.
Improper.
I don't know how to do it. Okay, so we're going to say, how many times does 8 go into 25? Well, 8 times 3 is 24. Since the improper is negative, the mixed will be negative as well. 8 goes into 25 3 times with 1/8 left over. Well, we have to check it. It's not going to be pretty, but we got to check it. Alright, so if we have negative 8/5 times, I'm going to leave it as the improper, just to show you that you can do some cross canceling here. So we're going to take and multiply it by a negative 25/8. I get to cross a bunch of stuff out. My goal is to end up with an answer of 5, and by cross canceling those, and 5 goes into 5 once, and 5 goes into 25 5 times, a negative 1 times a negative 5 is a positive 5. I know that was a lot. Trust me, that's right. Alright. Key multiplication words, you will find product and multiplied by. So we are going to write and solve each of these equations. So a number y multiplied by a negative 2 2/10 is 11. So we're going to call that a negative 2.2y equals 11.
Could I put the y in front? Am I allowed to do that?
You are, but it just looks wrong.
Okay.
You want the 2.2 to be the coefficient. When you're multiplying variables, the variables should come second.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for being devil's advocate. All right. So we are going to go ahead and to get our y alone, we want to. I have my 10-year-old daughter here. She's giggling. It is summer. Okay. Alright, we want to get the y alone. So again, we're not going to add a positive 2.2. We're going to divide a negative 2.2 because a number divided by itself is 1. Alright. I know Mrs. Tremblay shows a little divided by. I'm going to show you how I do my dividing. If you want to pick one of our methods, that's fine. I want to just divide it. I like showing it just looking as a fraction. So this is how I always do it. I'll probably be doing it in class. I just don't want to confuse you guys. So I'm taking a negative 2.2 and dividing it by itself because that gives me 1y, or just plain old y. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to take 11 divided by a negative 2.2. And that ends up being, well, I should have a negative answer, so I end up with a negative 5. Right. And just to double check it, negative 2.2 multiplied by a negative 5 should equal 11. Well, I know a negative times a negative is a positive. Yay. 2 times 5 is 10. This is a fifth. 2/10 is 1/5 of 5 is 1, so 10 plus 1 is 11. Again, trust me, it's right. Alright, next one, the product. Product means multiply. The product of a negative 12 and a number p is or equals 60. So that means that a negative 12p equals 60. Alright, so again, we want to get that p alone. We're going to divide by the exact same number that you see as your coefficient, because a number divided by itself is 1. I'm going to divide by negative 12 to get a 1p, or just plain old p. Over here, do the same thing. Divide by negative 12. 60 divided by negative 12 is negative 5. Alright. Key division words. The quotient of or divided by. So a number n divided by 8 is negative 7. So n divided by 8 is or equals negative 7. Alright, so here we have a division problem. How do you undo dividing? You multiply by whatever number is being divided by the variable. So n divided by 8, to get rid of that 8, I'm going to multiply by 8, or 8 over 1, so I can do some cross-canceling business. So I end up with n over 1, or just n. But I have to also multiply the other side by 8. Negative 7 divided by 8 is negative 56. Is a negative 56 divided by 8 equal to negative 7? Let's check. Yeah, it is. Okay. The quotient of a number m and 5 is negative 9. So m divided by 5 is negative 9. Get that m alone by multiplying by 5, or 5 over 1. Those go away. I'm left with m over 1, or just m. And I want to multiply this side by 5. Negative 9 times 5 is negative 45. Is a negative 45 divided by 5 equal to negative 9? Yes, it is. We're right. M equals a negative 45. We'll see you tomorrow.